Welcome to You Sip, I Sip, a weekly podcast with Northern Lights Winery founder Doug Bell, exploring the experiences from leaders in business, social media, and family. Now here's this week's exceptional guest.
Welcome to You Sip, I Sip. I have Troy Mckenzie here, good friend of the show, owner of the Black Clover, the Twisted Cork, entrepreneur, salesman, restaurateur, and a great friend of the show. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks very much. I appreciate being here and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're a wine connoisseur. You've been involved in the liquor industry for a long time. You have a real deep set of roots within the community of Prince George as well. So I'm really interested in getting into these stories with you. And I want to just start out by learning a bit more about what makes you tick and where you grew up.
Sure. Okay. So it's a bit of a strange story, but I'm a third generation Prince Georgian. I was born here, lived here till I was about 8 years old, 1979, and my mom and dad were both shift workers. My mom worked at the hospital. My dad worked at Husky. And December 1979, they decided that they would move to halfway around the world to Dubai, and my dad went over there for work, and so the whole family went with him. So it sort of changed things a little bit. My parents lived over there for just over 10 years. The school there, English-speaking school, only went to grade 8, so I had to go to some type of boarding school. I wanted to come back to Canada, so I went as close to Prince George that you could get at that time. So I went to the island to a private school there, Brentwood College. That was a boarding school. I went there. From there, I went straight to U of A to do my undergrad. After I graduated, I came back to Prince George. And it's sort of where the hospitality, not by plan, not by design, but that's when it started. It sort of snowballed into a number of different things. I worked for other people. I worked for a local pub. I worked for the Coast Hotel, running an Irish pub. And it was lots of fun. I learned a lot, but I realized that if I was to do it again, I would do it for myself, not for somebody else. But while I was working for the Coast, I got headhunted by a small BC company, a wine and spirits company, mostly a wine company at that time, and some ready-to-drink beverages, some big ones. They made some big ones, but yeah, still a small private BC company, and they convinced me to come work for them. So I worked as a territory manager, a sales guy for 16 years about. They sold a division of their company. I got sold with the company to Anheuser-Busch, AB InBev, and worked for them for 6 years. And then during the pandemic, they restructured, and I left that business. And since then, I've opened up my own agency. And so that's the liquor sales part of it. In 2006, I started getting interested in the hospitality component of the business again. And a friend of mine was also interested in getting back into the business. He was flipping boards at a sawmill. And so we made plans and leased what was then the old Waddling Duck, that building, with the plan that 3 to 5 years we have to be able to buy the building, or it doesn't really make sense. Just the margins in the industry are not all that lucrative, and I was still working a full-time job, and so we started. That was the Twisted Cork. So we opened that March 1st, 2009, and that's been active ever since. And so we did that for a bit. We did all right. We grew the business over that time, and in 2015 we bought the building next to us, and then spent the next 10 months renovating that, and we built from scratch the Black Clover. And so was started in 2016, and also has been going since. So now I have my own sales agency, the restaurant and the pub, but we have lots of good people that help us out.
I'm sure you're a very busy guy. And the funniest thing is that it seems like all of your businesses come down to people and like very much hospitality service-based type of businesses.
Mm-hmm.
When you're going and you developed out the beginning of your career, you started to look at things probably very differently because of where you grew up in the United Arab Emirates. Maybe tell us a little bit about what that experience really was like going from, Prince George to that very different culture.
It was eye-opening, as probably the phrase. I think that not, Prince George is a rural northern community, and was even more so back then. Camping, going fishing with my dad, that was vacation. That's what we did. The few times that we'd gotten down to Vancouver, that was a big deal. And for us to, I remember my parents telling me about when we were going to Dubai. As a kid, you have no idea what's going on, right? They were showing me Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner videos, trying to explain what desert is and what we're what we're moving to. But I would say that as confusing as it was, my parents are both very grounded and straightforward folks. So we having them there was all the confidence we needed, and they had never really done anything like that either. So we all got to experience all these crazy things in a really short amount of time. And I think what it did for me is just open my eyes to. I didn't know the diversity of what was happening around the world, or uh, different locations, different cultures, different languages, like different people, all those things. I became exposed at a very young age, so found myself being very accepting, and I guess as it lends itself to the food and beverage industry, opened my eyes to that as well. Like cuisine was different. We tasted different tastes. You smelt different things in the market. There wasn't a lot of alcohol in the Middle East at that time, but the rest of that, the food component, because it was so diverse and people from so many different backgrounds, it made me really appreciate that part of my life.
The United Arab Emirates has a very diverse group of people living there. Of course, many individuals are not from that country, and so they go there to work for a period of time, or maybe they stay for an extended period of time, and that produces a very interesting culture because, of course, there's the heritage of the Middle East, and of course, all of their accepting beliefs and values. And then, of course, Canadian customs are a little bit different as well. How do you think that shaped you, and what things would you suggest that kids growing up in Canada today that don't have those experiences maybe are missing?
Yeah, I think I've thought about this a lot, and I think that often, and I think it's more so today than ever, but people sort of get in their lane and they stay there. I didn't have that, and I don't think it's a luxury, but for the use of the phrase, I didn't have that luxury. Like you had to experience stuff that you weren't ready for. I had friends that didn't English wasn't their first language or even their second language, and you're in a classroom of 16 people and you're from 10 different countries, and uh, you realize everybody's sort of on ground level all of a sudden. So you just, it's not what, oh, I want this, I want that sort of went out the window. It's like, okay, I'm going to participate in this. I really think this is cool. You got to diversify into all these things. There's so many different lanes. You wouldn't even think about staying in one lane and putting the blinders on. It's like you have this a, amazing ability to try all these different things. My parents encouraged us, and I think that I had a much more diverse and interesting opportunity growing up than most people.
The other thing that Dubai is really known for is excess,
Mhm.
and really trying to stand apart from what everyone else is doing. Uh, when I was in Dubai, one of the things that I really recognized was that when you went somewhere, they really tried to be in their own lane and be unique to themselves. Now, that kind of is reflected in your own businesses as well. Is that something you believe you took from there? And is that how you think about like the products you sell and the people that you meet?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is my personal opinion about the industry, but there's definitely people that do it well, and then there's the other. But uh, due to my job and my upbringing, I got to see a lot of best practices, and you steal some of that. sits in your subconscious, or you hold it somewhere because you know it might come in handy. So I'd say at first instance, living in the Middle East, that's what I saw, that best practice of different cultures. You could take a little piece from here and there, and it ended up being quite impactful and helpful for me as I forged my way through the next couple decades.
And so, what was the impetus for you to move back to Canada?
Well, it was school, really. Like out of the gates, I could only go to school till grade 8, and then I had to go someplace, and the company would pay for the kids to go away because there was no other schooling system there. So um, that was that was it. I think in retrospect, not that I didn't like my time on the island, but I think that, man, did I pass up a couple opportunities to go. Lots of my friends went to Switzerland or France or U.S. Like there was, you can go to boarding school anywhere. But I kind of, my family was still. I had family in the island. I had family still in Prince George, and I just wanted, if I couldn't be with my parents, I wanted to be someplace close to family. So that was the choice.
That must have been really tough, though. I mean, you're a young guy and you're moving away from your parents. Your parents, of course, have this great opportunity, but most people, aren't ready to take that next step away yet.
Yeah, I think it's very true. I think it was much more difficult on my folks, to tell you the truth. I know it was really tough on my mom. And luckily, my brother is a few years older than me. He was already there. So, one, my parents had experienced one of the kids leaving home, and two, not that my brother acknowledged me while we were there. It was sort of, he's in grade 12 and he's got this little twerp coming in. But it was still a level of comfort knowing that if something went sideways, I had my brother there. I could lean on him. But yeah, it's different. But I guess what I'd say is it wasn't that difficult. We were really close. My family was close, uh, close knit family. But there was all sorts of support from my folks. My brother and the school did a pretty good job of understanding that my folks were halfway around the world and we needed support. So yeah, wasn't as difficult as I it sounds on paper.
And then you decided to move over to Calgary and go to U of A.
Yeah, Edmonton. Yep. And yeah, I got into a few different schools and thought about doing a bunch of different things, and you balance all that. Like I thought about going to McGill, and I thought about going to UBC, and I thought about going to U of A, and a couple of my closest friends were going to U of A. We had similar educational backgrounds and goals, and so I ended up going to Edmonton, and I really enjoyed it.
What do you think the key moment was for you in your upbringing that kind of led you to become so independent at such a young age?
Yeah, I think getting thrown into the water, I guess. Like, people. I mean, we just talked about it, but it's pretty unique to leave home at 12 and never, like, I've never lived with my folks again. It sounds strange, but to me, that was just what happened. And it happened with my peers in school. You saw that, so you thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So it gives you a level of confidence that maybe other kids that haven't experienced that see. But I mean, one of the interesting stories is you think it would be stressful and all these things, but there was numerous times where besides the lanyard around my neck, I'm 12, 13, I'm flying around the world by myself. Some flight attendant grabs you at the gate and takes you to the next gate. But it gives you a level of independence and confidence that maybe doesn't catch up with other people till later in life.
What point of your life do you think you realized that you were really good at sales and communicating with people?
Yeah, I'd say the first part of that is untrue. I'm a terrible salesperson, and luckily I own the sales company I work for now, so I can't get fired for saying that. But I'm I think I'm good with people. So the second half of that is my strength. I think that I communicate well. I'm open to dialogue. I'm open to arguing, as long as it's honest and fair. Like I think my strength is that interaction with people, and I get away with making some sales because of those attributes. But I know I've taken all the courses, I've done all the work, but if you chalk me up for sales. Even my best friends would say, no, he's not a salesman. He's a people person, maybe.
Okay, I want to stay here for a second because I
Okay.
think this is really, really interesting to me. One of the I think biggest misconceptions in life is that we aren't salespeople, but like what is it that makes someone buy something, in your opinion?
Oh, wow, that's a loaded question. I feel like I'm getting an interview now, but I'd say that, uh, huh, I think it's about well, it's about the product, right? I don't think that there's any benefit to giving people what they don't need. I don't I don't like that. I think that that's why I consider myself a poor salesperson. If you know want to get somebody to buy a vehicle for 40 grand more than they really should be buying, but for affordability or just capability, like there's people that automatically jump into that. I want whatever I can get. I don't I don't think that I try to think about figuring out people and figuring out what the product is that I'm doing and what makes sense, right? And that I don't know if that makes sense to you, but um, I think that you got to think about both sides. You got to think about the consumer and the sales component of it and find that match. Because for me, I thought when started doing sales, I don't I hated that cold call. I hated that, oh, every time I see this person, it's going to be awkward. So I developed relationships and trust. And then that made me capable of hitting the targets that the business that I work for expected of me. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I think this is really interesting because certainly I see this in my own world as well. That if you aren't able and confident that whatever it is that you're selling is going to benefit the purchaser in some way, shape, or form, they're never going to buy it from you again. It doesn't matter. You could be a great salesperson, you could move it to them, but the only way they're going to be successful is if that product ends up adding more value to them than the money they spent for it. And that kind of comes back to you being a people person as well, because when you are developing these relationships, you want long-term relationships that you're going to be able to connect with somebody over an extended period of time. And you don't want to necessarily go in there and sell them one thing and then leave because that doesn't necessarily benefit you down the road either. And so really you're building trust, right? And that's actually what I believe people buy is they buy trust, and once that trust is broken, it's so hard to rebuild, right? And what do you think who was the first person that you sold something to?
That's a good question. And I can tell you, I think the first sales experience I had was as a young lacrosse player in Prince George, selling chocolate bars or chocolate covered nuts. I remember going door to door and being horrified. You know, my mom went to the door the first couple times. We'd go to family friends, like try and make it easy, but I just thought it was what it's a terrible experience. And it wasn't obviously we were fundraising for our teams, but as far as selling to people, I guess I could probably best use an experience that's still pertinent today, which the Crest Hotel in Prince Rupert is one of my favorite places. And back then, he was the food and beverage manager, had come from the island, and he'd started his job about 2 weeks before I started my job. And we're same age, sort of similar backgrounds, similar likes, and we're sort of having this honest conversation about, are we both in over our head or what's going to happen, right? He's in a privately held, really cool, quaint, but hotel that has a demand for excellence. And I'm working for a small family run uh, alcohol business that is basically trying to get VQA wines off the map. And I didn't know a lot about wine. Obviously, they trained me as I went along, but we sort of made this synergy that, hey, we're both going to be okay. Like I can see that I like sitting here having this conversation. I see what you have, what your expectations of your company, what the expectations of his boss were. But I think we can find a way to help each other out here. And that was really the first time. And it was the biggest account that I switched, and the first account that I ever switched from a competitor to the Mission Hill family as far as BC wines. And um, Scott Farwell is the gentleman's name, and we're great friends to this day. And I think that was probably the first sales experience that I had that I realized I think I might be able to I might be able to do this.
Yeah, and you were in the Mission Hill group very early on, and uh, a lot of people don't know, but they call Mission Hill the winery that Mike built.
Yeah.
Have you heard that story, and can you tell us that?
Oh, I know the story so well, and yeah, I find it so interesting. But okay, so 100%. The Marc Anthony Group is a privately held company. Their biggest notoriety, in my mind, is Mission Hill. But what most people remember is Mike's, because Mike's Hard Lemonade was the first spirit cooler in the country. But I think I need to add a couple points here, because the interesting thing about Anthony Mendel, the owner of the Marc Anthony Group, is this guy's crazy innovative. Like he's done stuff that will everybody should be shocked. So first flavored cider in North America that we know of. First spirit alcohol beverage. First wine cooler, Cal Coolers, if you remember those were his. Um, all these things that he did, and his passion was wine. Like when he graduated from UBC, he was selling European wines. He's from Austria, out of the back of his car as a job. That was his job. He bought a Atco trailer and 14 acres on the top of the mountain where Mission Hill exists now, and built. It was a cidery, and he thought, I'm going to grow grapes here. Everybody said, you're crazy. Like there's something wrong with you. Like fell on your head or something. But the truth is he's done everything that he said he would. He's passionate, and he created all of these things himself. Mike's definitively was a profit center, and he pumped a lot of that. I mean, he built Mission Hill on those dollars. I don't think that he would ever dismay that. I mean, he ended up selling it to Anheuser-Busch, that whole component. But in the meantime, he still owns the business in the States, which is 20-fold of what it is in Canada, and then has come up with things like White Claw. I mean, all this stuff is innovative creation from BC resident that we should be proud of. And so it's not like I need to defend him. He doesn't need any defense. But I think that when I think about and hear people say Mike's the brand that built, well, sure, it contributed on the dollars and cents side, but he created all these things, right? And people should, in my mind, respect and admire somebody that took all these chances, created all these brands, not just Mike's, and also really put VQA wines on the map for the whole province.
I think that there is a huge lack of awareness for Anthony von Mendel and what he's accomplished with all of his brands. And I bet you, if you interviewed 10 of the podcast listeners right now, probably 9 of them never knew that White Claw, Mike's Hard Lemonade, and Mission Hill were all the same company, and all from BC as well. Now, you were there at a very early stage for that company when all this exceptional growth, which is still going on, by the way, but was happening. And what was the culture like at that time?
Yeah, so I can it was a BC company. It wasn't really national. So there's a couple things that this guy did that were really innovative that spiked this growth. And but I think there was, besides office staff, there were 16 people that worked for Marc Anthony in the country at that time. Like meetings, Anthony would come in and talk to us. That doesn't happen as much now, but it was small. It was in a little boardroom in some third-rate hotel in Delta. You know what I mean? Like that's where this started. But I think that it was actually very passionate. Like people, I think that he saw better than the people that worked for him of the upside of where this was going, and we had tremendous growth in all these categories. The next most interesting thing is he's obviously has different visions of people. He brought Corona to Canada, which is most people wouldn't know that. but it was at the 1986 Expo, and he saw it, and he's like, "Oh, this is marketable. I think this we could sell this." And then he sold it for 15 years and had double-digit growth for all 15 years, with Corona and the whole Modelo family. But it's tremendous that he has the insight into these things. And Corona was also something that provided money, one, for the creation of Mike's, and two, for the acquisition and development of the VQA brands that he represents now.
And that's such an incredibly powerful brand in British Columbia is the VQA, of course. What do you think it is about Anthony that has created a scenario where he can see things so clearly before the consumer sees them?
Yeah, I think it's you have to you have to have the passion to see the path. And he was not going to be at a point where he wanted to fail at any of these things. But I think when you alluded to the Mike's comment and why people can get away with that and why he doesn't even dislike that comment, is because he needed those tools. He needed revenue to purchase land, to plant grapes. He knows that it's going to be, 7, 8 years before he's even going to be able to produce stuff. Like, he didn't even have sticks in the ground. You needed some kind of income to bolster what your future plans were. But I don't think that anybody that knew the Marc Anthony group, and certainly not Anthony, misunderstood that the passion was wine, and these were tools, and tools to provide revenue to create where he really wanted to go. But this guy's, even before Mission Hill sort of took off, his connections, almost all the wineries he represents around the world are family-owned wineries, because that's the way he believes that industry should be propelled. And his relationships with wineries like Antinori is crazy. Like, it's a handshake deal, really. But he has a number of these with some of the biggest wineries in the world because he's passionate about wine. He understands what it takes, and he understands, Antinori, for example, 26 generations of winemaking. He applauds that, and he wants to partner with that at all costs. So that's the kind of relationships, to go back to what we were talking about, that he develops. It's just bigger players.
It's so incredible. And at some point though, you started developing this similar passion towards wine and not just BC wine, but I think also international wines as well. How did you get started and what drove you towards this industry?
Yeah, I think that, most of my hospitality industry stuff before I started selling booze was, pub style, and not a wine focus at all. I was lucky to, with my parents as a young kid, or a little bit later, to have some family friends, or yeah, just friends that enjoyed that part of their social network, and so I it took me a while. I can't remember the exact age, but I guess I was interested in wine, but had no knowledge. Marc Anthony was exceptional at training us, and because it was such a small group, and we got sort of coddled into seeing these people that uh, did wine very well from all over the world. And back then, when we were so small, we'd get, if you performed well as a salesperson, I got to go all over the world to see wineries, to learn from winemakers, to taste and experience why they're so passionate about it, and what makes it great. So just very lucky, but I think the education that job offered me started it, and then I really loved it. I love wine. I'm passionate about it. I think that started it, and then I never stopped. Like, I wanted the education, I wanted the experience. Yeah, it just became part of me.
Around when was this?
I would say in the late '90s. Yeah, yeah, I'd say in the late '90s, early 2000s. Like,
Recently, we've had guests like John Schreiner and Ben Stewart from Quail's Gate. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is how much the wine industry changed through the 90s into the 2000s. When my dad was growing up, BC wines were not on the map.
Yeah.
Maybe there was some ice wines that were developing in the 80s and 90s. And then some of the wineries started to win some big awards on the international stage. Of course, this was after a real changing of the guard when the federal government had them rip all of the old vines out of the ground and plant the new European grape style, the Vitis vinifera varieties. And so we started to move from this international focus on wine to the domestic focus of VQA. What do you think that's good for the industry? And if so, like what are some of your favorites?
I think it's great. So uh, yeah, it's I find it so interesting. So I can tell you one thing, that when I started working for Marc Anthony, trying to sell VQA wine, forget, like, the the association with BC made wine was terrible. Like, most people that own liquor stores, and like, to get your wine, that was almost impossible. I think there was 16 commercially sold wineries when I started. So you think about that. There's a heck of a lot more now, but people didn't want to talk about it. They thought the quality was poor. They just thought that they're better off to get Gallo, Corbett Canyon, White Zin, something like that, on the table, instead of um, these wines. And these wines were young, like, they were young. But you got to start somewhere. But I think that I love the story, and I think that it the Okanagan, as small as it is, and I think that that's the misconception often about. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think there's 2,200 acres or something under vine in the Okanagan right now. There's about half that when I started, and I think Anthony owned 65% of it, 70%. Now there's a couple hundred wineries, and it's a much more put out there. But I think that what people don't understand is wine takes time, and whether it's terroir, whether it's the right vines, as you alluded to, the viticulture involved. I mean, John Symes, who was the original winemaker that won the Avery Trophy for the best Chardonnay in the world in 1994 with the 92 vintage, that guy was a big part of the Okanagan, maybe as much as Anthony. Anthony's excellence was bringing this guy from New Zealand, from Montana wines across the world, and saying, "Hey, I'm going to try and go grow some grapes here." And I'm sure John thought, "What is going on here?" But anyways, his attention to detail, and lack of pesticides and chemicals, and do the right thing. These guys are second to none. That was their passion, and they weren't going to hurry it, but they still wanted us to sell some stuff that nobody wanted to buy in the early 2000s, late 90s.
The, it's incredible because the industry is just unrecognizable from where it used to be. In a lot of ways, at Northern Lights Winery, we say the same thing about where the fruit wine industry could be in its infancy. Today, historically, fruit wines were sweet, sugary, juicy things that were for special occasions, maybe desserts, but weren't something people would have on a regular basis. And that's where we really focused on that same thing. Like, how do you create a quality association with your product? How do you create consistency among the industry? And it's not just about our wines, it's about how we interact with the industry, which is one of the reasons we created a society that collaborates with all of the major fruit wine industry players. And we've now created a quality certification for fruit wines, which is a mirror from the VQA program. And even things that you mentioned, like aging, is such an important part of wines, and yet it hadn't been done in fruit wine, winemaking in the past. Yet we've got a 4-year aged wine that just won a double gold at the All Canadian Wine Championships. So it's nice to see how these things kind of the mimic in terms of the growth and the development of the industry. But what do you think the tipping point was for the BC wine industry during the development that really brought it to the next level?
Yeah, well, I think that I think it's ongoing, and I think the appreciation, understanding of the quality, the escalation of the grape varietals and the pure liquid that's produced is the most important thing. But as I talked about John Symes and that Avery Trophy in '94, that's what they're going to say might have turned the tables there. It's sort of, I mean, I don't know if you've heard the story about that Avery Trophy, but they have
Yes.
500 testers. They test it blind, so they don't see the wine. They don't know where the wine's from. And it came up with this Canadian winery that nobody's ever heard of, and they're like, oh, somebody screwed up. Like somebody put the wrong wine in the wrong vat, and so they retest it, and it won again, which is super interesting. But that was hey, look at us, we can do this, right? Those were 10-year-old Chard vines that winning the best Chardonnay made anywhere in the world with a Kiwi winemaker and some crazy Canadian guy that is telling everybody we can grow grapes in the Okanagan. But I think, yeah, if you look to one event, I think that would be the most memorable to me about that transition. That confidence of consumers came from the other winemakers, and these people are sort of like, I'll take a little step in there, but I don't know how much I want to invest in this. And then that provided these guys sort of the launch to get public awareness and support.
And you really developed that portfolio for a long time, but eventually you decided, you're going to get in hospitality for yourself. What made that decision for you, or why did you decide to move into that realm?
Yeah, I really loved it, and I never planned on working in that industry. The first jump into there was with a family from Prince George. I helped them out. They had bought a pub, and they'd asked me if I'd maybe push off my education. I was going to go do my master's, and asked me if I'd put that off for a couple of years and come help. And I thought, oh, sounds pretty cool. Live at a pub, run a pub. So I did that, and it was really fun, but a ton of work. And then towards like year three, I got approached from the Coast Hotel. They had a pretty fun Irish pub in the bottom of the hotel at that time, and they asked me if I'd come on board with them. So I went there.
Sergeant O'Flaherty's.
Sergeant O'Flaherty's.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when we talk about my stuff, like I love food and wine, and I had all these experience from being a wine rep and going to all these restaurants. And, man, like it sort of started the itch, and the fact that my brother's a chef and my best friend at the time was a chef is sort of that's what everybody's looking for, and I had those things already. So I thought we can take a shot. It's not high risk when you're not buying the bricks and mortar. Like to get in, it was kind of like a safe bet. I could keep my job, but see if that's what I wanted. And so that led me into that. And once I was in, then you spend a few years trying to build the business and make it viable. That took a while, and we hung in there and we built it, and it seemed really short, but the first 4 years sort of went by in a flash. But we doubled our business in the first 4 years and then doubled a couple times after that. So, it was kind of like a little mom and pop shop. But after we bought the building and we had to pay the mortgage and property taxes and all this stuff, we thought, well, we got to get a couple more shekels in the bank or we're going to be in trouble. So we focused on it, and I think that we were able to grow a pretty viable restaurant for the future after that.
And the Twisted Cork, it's an institution within Prince George. You were very well known for your wine list right from the very beginning. I think that everybody recognizes that if you're looking for great quality food and great quality wine in a very nice, warm environment, that's an amazing place to go. How did you develop the concept for that, and how did it get implemented?
It was interesting, and I think that um, it wasn't always we didn't always see eye to eye, like the people that I was doing with, the chefs, and even some of the I knew some of the servers had worked for me before, with me before, and you sort of say your concept. But I think my background in Prince George, I realized that in and this is my personal opinion, but I don't think that there's any room for pretension in Prince George in this industry. There's not room. I mean, we have some beautiful high end places, but for me, I want you to feel comfortable coming in a t-shirt and your work boots, or coming in a suit. And really, that casual fine dining was one of the catchphrases that we sort of used, but I want to make it open to everybody. Back then, and nobody will believe me now because now everybody does it, but there was no tapas, there was no cheese boards, there was no, like, all these things. We were fairly innovative, and don't get me wrong, I stole these ideas from from much more urban places, but we brought them here, and it sort of got the ball rolling for these people. Like, we could get something a little different. I was obviously a huge wine fanatic by the time we were opening this, so spent a lot of time, and I sold for one of the major wine distributors in Canada. So I got to see and be aware of things that were doing well in other places and that people would also appreciate. So I had a little bit of a leg up getting into that part of it.
I bet the wine list must have been the most fun part of developing the concept. And you opened that, and I mean that you had that for quite a few years. You mentioned how you bought the building, and that was really an important part of your business plan. Why was that?
Well, it's just, anybody that works in the industry understands that it like, neighborhood pubs, when Prince George used to have 15 neighborhood pubs, and people were smoking cigarettes and having pints after work,
You had a
on the way.
cigar lounge, right?
We had a cigar lounge. It was gone before we got there.
Yeah.
We lost that. Um, but I think back then, taxation and just it was really profitable. But the food and beverage industry now, it's tight margins. If you're a rocket scientist, really paying attention, it's a 12% margin, sort of, where, so you got to have a long-term plan, right? You can have a few bad months and be upside down in a hurry. So I knew that, for it to be something that you could commit to long term, we had to we had to be able to have the real estate as a safety net. That's the that's the long term plan. That's where we were going to hopefully make some money and be successful, if not on a month to month basis, but long term, to have that real estate that you could sell. That was sort of the end of the tunnel for us, and what we looked forward to.
What do you think the customer wants? Like, we talked about how in Dubai that it can be very unique. Like all of the experiences are either top of their class or they're totally unique. What do you think the consumer wants? Because you clearly have been successful over a very long period of time.
Yeah, I think people want value. I think they want comfort, um, and I think they want flavor. I mean, it's it's so much more complicated now with dietary restrictions and different isms that people are attached to. It makes it really difficult. The expectation of the consumer is also much more demanding than it was. I mean, before you had it or you didn't. Now people come in and tell you how you got to make their meal. It's interesting, but you have to be able to flex and adjust and keep those consumers happy. So I think it's those things that I said, and I think it's also adaptability, um, in your industry, to listen to what the consumer wants, adjust, and then try to do the best you can to appease that clientele you're going after.
And then you found a property next to you came available. You purchased it and you developed it into the Black Clover, which is an incredible institution. I say again, but like it's a place of gathering, right, where people come for live music and fun and good times. So it's a very joyous place in a lot of ways. But they're also pubs are one of the most difficult businesses to run. Why did you decide to go in that direction?
Yeah, I thought there was a gap in the market, I guess, is what I would say. Like, you think about, I grew up, even when I was at Sargent's. So you think about back then, people at Sargent's was a warm up place, and then they go to the 720 or the 20, I don't know, 770 upstairs, and then they could go to the Generator, they could go to the Cadillac, the PG Hotel. Uh, it was an experience to go out downtown. Those things slowly went away for numbers of different reasons, but um, I thought that there was a spot. I thought Sergeant O'Flaherty's was really successful for a number of years and then went away. I thought that that gap um, was what needed to be gotten after. I live music, so that one man band, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I think it's important. I mean, people don't go out as much. I think that you have to give them a reason and something to look forward to. And it took us a while. We weren't great at it at the start, but to have a 12 a stable of 12 very skilled entertainers that we rotate in, including some great local talent. Um, it took a while. I think people might have gave up on us in the first couple of years, thought that we had no idea what we were doing. Our idea was right, but sometimes execution takes a while to catch up. So all those things, whether it's super challenging. As you and I talked briefly before we got going today, that you got to be resilient. You got to keep moving forward. And if you don't, the industry's probably not for you. None of this stuff happens. You gotta create it. You gotta drive your way through that. It's the only, yeah, I think it's, unless you were born with a big bank account, and sometimes that doesn't even help. But if you don't keep moving forward and keep trying, um, and keep failing, sometimes
Hmm.
the best way to succeed is fail a few times, and it forces you to reinvent and try different things.
Well, restaurateurs are a special breed of individuals that love, providing value for people, and definitely it is not for the faint of heart. I mean, there's probably more stress in restaurants than anything else because you're getting that phone call if it's 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, something goes wrong. Your fryer breaks on a Friday at lunch, or something random happens. There's always a problem. And that's what kind of makes it exciting to some degree because it's always different. Uh, but over time, like for those who are resilient over an extended period of time, are those people who actually enjoy it because you just can't do it for a long period of time unless you just love the people in the industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's futile in my mind. It's futile because, as we talked about, there's not a lot of margin there. Uh, it can be super frustrating if you don't love what that industry. If you're not passionate about those things, the people that work for you, all of those things. If it's not really the top of your list, um, you're going to have a heck of a hard time being successful, in my personal opinion.
Hmm. And you've decided now to layer on one more level of complexity with your agency that you have now. What's it called, and how did that develop?
Yeah. So I guess the easiest way we would talked about it. So my partner in the business is Leeway Yu, and he worked for Molson when I was working for Marc Anthony. We knew each other. We were friendly, appreciated each other's work ethic, and Leeway had left Molson, trying a couple other things. Like I said, during the pandemic, they restructured the company. 37 people got packaged up. I was one of them, and so I have friends that run some VQA wineries in the Okanagan. We thought, well, maybe we'll start small, and so we started doing a couple other wineries out of the Okanagan, and then we thought, well, we might as well swing for the fences. They hadn't replaced me since I left Marc Anthony, so we approached Marc Anthony, different um, executive group, people that maybe 1 out of 10 that knew or remembered who I was. So it took 6 months of pitching business and having meetings and trying to find the right fit, and we've been with them for the last 3 years. So they're the biggest part of our business, and then we do some craft breweries and some smaller wineries, but we service the exact same area that I used to. So north of 100 Mile, all the way up to Fort Nelson, and then the ocean and the border. So
What's old is new, I guess, and that must be a lot of fun, and to have that under your own name and your own brand is incredible. Of course, Leeway is another awesome individual in the community. His father even designed our winery as an engineer. So It's really so nice how tight knit this community is. Just coming back to you as a person, you've been in Prince George for a long time. What does it mean to you and your family, and what do you try and do in your spare time?
It's really interesting. I think that the normal Prince George resident likes to sort of give our own city a hard time. You know, kind of like uh, look pretty dirty in the fall and the early spring, and it's a funny smell if you're coming in from the east. Sometimes, like all these things are maybe disparaging to the city, but uh, if you've been here and experienced everything that's around Prince George, it's a pretty amazing place to live. And like I said, I'm third generation. I grew up fishing with my grandfather, going out hunting with my dad. Um, I spent a lot of time in the outdoors. I live out at Westlake, which very lucky little place, but a great piece of land, and I appreciate that stuff, right? Like I appreciate being on the water. I appreciate being a side by side back in the bush. Um, I, as much as I don't like plowing snow, I appreciate the seasons. You know, I've lived in places that had no seasons, so I do appreciate that. But I think the most important thing is the people. Like it sort of brings you back here, and know a lot of great people, mostly through sport. I'm a big rugby guy, but I've played hockey and squash and lacrosse in this town, and most of my friendship base is out of sport. But what you find out is the same as everything. Really, there's a bunch of really good people, and you know, different than 25 years ago for me. My friends all have kids and families and different sort of agendas, but doesn't make them any less great people. So I think what keeps me here is the people and the landscape, I guess.
I think that's a great note to end off on. If anyone wants to follow up with you later on, where can they find you on social media or other means?
Yeah, I'm a terrible social media person, but both the restaurant and the pub have social media. I am on social media just under Troy Mckenzie, but yeah, the pub and the restaurant are easy places to reach out to me, and either that or on our websites are probably the best bet.
Well, thank you so much, Troy. We've learned a lot today. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your wisdom. And hopefully, everyone out there gets a chance to at least see you in person or enjoy one of your beautiful restaurants. Thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see everyone else next week. Until then, cheers.
Thanks a lot, Doc. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to You Sip, I Sip. Please hit the 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you'd like to learn more about Northern Lights Winery, text us at 604-670-4046 or visit us on social media at Northern Lights Winery.